Hello guys, Tops here, back from my executioner run, and I think this is, as you guys know, maybe I have made an executioner run, or actually I did attempt, I think this is the second run where I took crippling strikes and executioner on everybody, and I was elaborating basically all the builds, and my core findings were Crippling Strikes Executioner. Executioner, just as a damage perk, is kind of nice as in addition. Crippling Strikes is only worth it on certain builds, and that's what I want to show you today. So, in general, the Crippling Strikes Executioner, I only see Crippling Strikes as additional setup so you can proc more executioner. And sometimes you get nice injuries. The problem is a lot of injuries don't work on your opponents. Certain enemies, like the whole undead faction, is immune to injuries. Some opponents are too weak for injuries to matter, goblins. But it tends to be stronger on tougher enemies. So barbarians in general, something like orcs, it seems to be helpful against. It also significantly reduces the hits to kill, basically, especially on throwers. And that's kind of like these are all my builds that I've did, and I kind of want to lead you through the builds and say what I think is good and what is bad, what worked, what didn't work. I think in general, Crippling Strikes Executioner, I see them as additional damage perks, like Headhunter, for instance. And they can really help weapons that tend to be low damage to do more damage. And it is really strong on AoE builds and range builds. In general, on builds that have more flex perks, on builds where I can actually spend 2 perks on additional damage. So, let's start with my Lone Wolf. It's a Brute guy, Crippling Strikes Executioner with an Hammer AoE build. In general, I don't think it is that useful on big two-handed weapons, because if that weapon hits an opponent, it does so much damage that it basically almost always injures somebody. Like a Chosen is injured if I hit him with a two-handed hammer. So I think the Crippling Strike didn't help that much. The Executioner can be nice, again, for the additional damage. I reap once, I hit 3 targets, I injure 3 targets. The Executioner secures the fact that I can actually, with the next reap, I kill all 3 of them. So this is plus 20% damage. It should be noted that this damage also affects armor, so it's also plus 20% damage against armor and hit points. So that alone makes it really good, especially for something like the sword, but we can get to that later. So didn't find it that useful on the big hammer guy. On the other hand, on the small hammer guy, this is a hammer shield guy that I built, I found it extremely useful, because the one-handed hammer does always at least 10 hit point damage. And on certain enemies, that's enough to injure them with Crippling Strikes. And especially against, again, orcs, Chosen, who have a lot of armor and a lot of effective hit points, this build seems to perform decently well, because of the insane armor damage that we do, and because of the fact that we do guaranteed damage to hit points. So, tends to be good in these kind of scenarios. It's also good for a brother that has fairly low melee defense, so I can give that guy just a shield and he becomes kind of an off-tank. There are certain variants, you can do them with Shield Expert Indom and make him a proper tank instead of Killing Frenzy. This is the more offensive version, you can go make him Battleforge too. Anyways, that's not the point. This worked fairly well for me, I must say. Next one, Swordlance. I really think the Swordlance, this is a famed one, is one of my favorite AoEs, and it does high damage. I mean, it has fairly low base damage, but it hits 3 targets consistently. It's really good against low armor opponents or medium armor opponents. Good against low hit point opponents, like basically everybody except for maybe orcs and barbarians and big beasts, this weapon is really good against. And even against orcs and big beasts, you strip away the armor. And my findings were that the Executioner Crippling Strikes just gives this weapon more damage and more utility. So again, a lot of injuries actually don't work or don't matter, but some injuries do. And something like a cut arm sinew, which lets the opponent do less damage, or something like, I don't know, how is it called? A sliced hand or a pierced hand, something that reduces their melee or range skill significantly. So this debuff is a little bit like Overwhelm in that sense. It can be, at least. It can reduce the opponent's damage output significantly. So on these AoE builds where you actually hit a lot of bros, a lot of opponents potentially, I find this very strong. Because these AoE builds traditionally tend to have low damage and they have damage problems. And this one helps with that. Also increases the single target damage. Especially if I reap an opponent and he's injured now. And then I attack him with a single target attack. I do plus 20 damage because of the Executioner. So this helps that weapon with the single target. Also, I think the AoE Swordlance's Battleforge Frontline AoE Swordlance has the spare perks to actually go for this build. Yeah, find it useful so far. On the two-handed flail, I don't think it's useful. I think the Headhunter build is way stronger. I have a specific build guide for that. Didn't like it on the two-handed flail. Next one, the mace. Same with the maces. I think it's kind of like the hammer. It does not... yeah, it's just... I think it's overkill. A lot of the time, the big two-handed weapons, they tend to injure their opponents anyways. And Executioner, just having casually Executioner is kind of nice. But the Crippling Strikes is kind of not really useful on this build. And on the Mace Katal build, by the way, I kind of stopped building pure Mace guys. I most of the time build Mace Katal guys, so I don't have the perks on Mace Katal builds. On the pure Mace guy, Crippling Strikes is overkill. Executioner, it's kind of nice to do additional damage because you're gonna injure your opponent most of the time anyways on the first hit. Next one, the Swordmaster. This is a Nimble variant of that build. Idea behind that is I have a low who had fairly low attack and not that high defense, so I made him into this AoE Swordmaster build with the Greatsword. My findings were the Executioner Crippling Strikes helps this weapon immensely with its low damage problems, because this weapon has fairly low armor pen and fairly low effectiveness against armor, but really high base damage. So this weapon struggles against more armored opponents. And the Executioner is really nice to help this weapon out. If you get plus 20% damage on your attacks because you injured the target with your sword is nice. Also, the cutting injuries tend to be the injuries that cause bleedings and can reduce the hit points of the opponents. Although sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a little bit unclear which one work properly and which one not. But also you can split hands and whatnot, so and cut stuff, cut arms in you, and so you can reduce the opponent's damage output and the opponent's skill basically. So I would see Crippling Strikes similar to something like Overwhelm, although it is less consistent, more random, and does not work against undead. So you have to take that in mind. Overwhelm works against everything in the game. This Crippling Strikes Executioner does not work against everything in the game. But this build pumps out damage, shits out damage, destroys lower opponents, brigands, noble houses. It tends to do well against nomads too, because of the Nimble. Crippling Strikes Executioner is really good against Nimble too, because Nimble gives you a lot of the times a higher resistance to injuries, and with Crippling Strikes you reduce that. So a lot of the times you do cut faster through Nimble boys with Crippling Strikes Executioner. That's something I have found out. So against nomad armies, also nomads in general, or the noble armies from the nomads, tends to be really strong against those. Yeah, really strong. I think the Battleforge version of this build is a little bit more survivable, but this as a tempo early mid-game build, I could see. This is a tempo early mid-game build. I could see that as additional damage buff, especially early on. For a bro that doesn't have too many stats, who's lacking a little bit in attack, maybe a little bit in defense, so yeah. Decent build for that. The Bardiche, next one. The Bardiche, Crippling Strikes Executioner. Yeah, in my opinion, the Bardiche is a weird weapon. I'm gonna make a separate video for that, but the Split Man, as you can see, does so much damage that Crippling Strikes doesn't matter. You're gonna injure anything anyways. The only thing where it matters is against Unholds, by the way. So Crippling Strikes is really good to kill Unholds fast in conjunction with Executioner. So that's something that need to be set separately. But these two-handed weapons, anything that has like less HP than an Unhold, you're gonna injure probably on the first shot. So, and you're probably gonna kill it with the second shot anyways. And that's kind of the point, especially on Axis on something like these ones, the Bardiches too. Sometimes you hit an opponent once and you hit him twice and he survives with very low HP and with very low armor. So the Executioner, with an Executioner, a 3-shot can turn into a 2-shot. So I find, especially with Axis, because of how the Split Man works, that it tends to destroy a lot of armor and leaves opponents a lot of the times alive with low hit points. So I think casually grabbing Executioner on X-Bros is probably not the wrong choice. Can make a 3-shot into a 2-shot more consistent. Crippling Strikes is, in my opinion, overkill though. Here is another mace guy. We already did mace guys. Bannermans don't count. Not enough perks for Crippling Strikes Executioner. Archer. I have found, and I made Archer videos. You guys can watch that. But I have found, especially, this is a specific case where we have a weapon that does really low damage. But with Headhunter, Crippling Strikes, Executioner, Killing Frenzy, and Berserk, this weapon shits out damage. And it is crazy how much that actually matters. We have an Archer with not a famed bow, with an unfamed bow that actually does damage, significant damage. Like, especially with Headhunter and Executioner, we tend to even 2-shot 120 HP's Reavers on headshots. Like, this is crazy. Really, really surprising how much damage you can do if you go for Crippling Strikes Executioner and Headhunter. Very important. Headhunter is important on this build. You can go for some too, Jet of Footwork. So the idea, that's kind of like the key findings, really, really strong on range bros. Crippling Strikes Executioner as additional damage. Because especially bows, they tend to do not that much damage in range. Alright, next one. Another Swordlance. Actually, this is a Cleaver. Yeah, Cleaver is one of these builds, same with the Duelist builds. I don't have the perks to put Crippling Strikes Executioner on. Maybe a casual Executioner, but there's no way I can put Crippling Strikes on top of that. I tried that with a Cleaver. His damage was high, but the Crippling Strikes, I didn't feel so great. Like, we need more perks for other stuff. Next one, the Dagger Duelist. The Dagger does so little damage that Crippling Strikes does not matter, in my opinion. Or it matters at the point where you basically have killed your opponents. Executioner as a single perk can be nice if, for instance, if you use your range bros. That's something I sometimes do, is I just use my Archer and something like my Thrower and my Crossbow guy to just sprinkle injuries on my opponents, but not kill them. So all of my Executioners has set up to do more damage. So casually grabbing Executioner if you have the perk on the Dagger Duelist, again, is a fairly tight build, so you don't have too many perks, too many flex perks. I would say it's alright. The Crippling Strikes is definitely something that didn't feel... I didn't feel the impact of that. So didn't matter too much because the damage is fairly low of the Dagger, so well. Next one. This is a brawny sword guy, Crippling Strikes Executioner. I think this was kind of a test if Crippling Strikes Executioner can be a substitute for Killing Frenzy. Answer is maybe, sometimes. On specific bros that kind of lack the stats, especially Fatigue, to actively use Berserk Killing Frenzy on AoE. Yeah, Crippling Strikes Executioner can be okay. But obviously it is stronger with Berserk Killing Frenzy. So, yeah. Taking Executioner as a casual damage perk for, let's say, Fatigue neutrals is not a bad thing. Maybe even with Crippling Strikes, but Crippling Strikes is the one that is mostly debatable, especially with 2 NS plus 8. This was a more experimental build, this sword guy. I liked it way more with Killing Frenzy. This guy, Thrower. Okay, I find it really, really strong on throwers. Executioner Crippling Strikes. Why is the question. The answer is you consistently 2-shot stuff. Very consistently. You consistently 2-shot Brigands, Noble Houses. You tend to sometimes 2-shot Nomads, lower Nomads. You tend to 2-shot Thralls, sometimes even... not the Raiders. The second tier Barbarians. Not the Chosen, the other guys. You guys know what I mean. They have 120 HP. With Crippling Strikes Executioners, you can 2-shot these ones as well, with Duelist and Throwing Mastery. So, Crippling Strikes Executioners, really, really strong on throws, because it is just additional damage, and this is one of these builds where I think you have enough perks to go for Crippling Strikes Executioner most of the time. You have enough flex perks for that. And it consistently makes stuff where, this is a thrower 2 by the way, where somebody without mastery, without Crippling Strikes Executioner would kill something in 3 shots. This guy kills it with 2, guaranteed. Because the first hit with the barbed javelin, bundle of heavy javelins, is a guaranteed injury with Executioner, more or less. And the second one, you have the Executioner proc. So you do so much damage. You can consistently 2-shot most stuff in the game. Really, really good. And yeah, that's what I have found out about this build. It's really strong. I like the combination between the frontline build. It's kind of like a hybrid, melee hybrid with a Famed Shamshir. Yeah, the Famed Shamshir is kind of a meme going for Gash. I think it costs too much fatigue, but this is like, yeah, I don't know. Kind of the Crippling Strikes without using Crippling Strikes. Or just a guaranteed injury no matter what. Anyways, don't find it so useful. But yeah, you kind of want to have quick hands too, instead of gifted on this build, I think. But really, really strong Crippling Strikes Executioners on pure throwers and hybrids, by the way. So also helps you out if you become the sword duelist in melee with your low damage sword. Helps you to do more damage, especially against armor targets with Executioner. Really strong. Like that a lot. This guy is a trash polearm build, but again, it's also for polearm builders. Really strong Crippling Strikes Executioner, but gonna discuss that on my crossbow polearm guy, because this is a proper crossbow polearm guy. Crippling Strikes Executioner shines, Headhunter 2 shines really on this build. And all of 3 weapons, or all 4 weapons that this build can use, highly benefit from more damage and from more utility, because you have AoE. So let's say if you use a normal polearm, you like the Headhunter, because most polearms have additional headshot chance, but you also like Crippling Strikes Executioner in order to do more damage for you. So you can actually, it reduces again the hits to kill that you need to do, which is really solid on this build. If you go for the Swordlance, again you have AoE, same as the Swordlance builds. You highly profit from Headhunter, Killing Frenzy, Executioner. all of that stuff. It's just more damage. You kill stuff more faster, more easily. Even harder opponents that have more armor tend to die faster because of these perks. And if you are a crossbow guy, with crossbow mastery you go up to, I think, 70% armor pen. Is that right? Yeah, 70% armor pen. Means with crippling strikes it's a guaranteed injury, no matter what. So you become very strong against chosen, and you can, with your crossbow, just injure one guy. So other bros that tend to struggle a little bit with damage, so somebody like a sword guy, for instance, with executioner, just can come in and do more damage. And maybe you are actually able to kill a chosen with one crossbow bolt and a big hit of a two-hander because of the crippling strikes executioner. That happens sometimes, or that can happen. And the next thing, guns. I like this with guns, because guns have the same issue. They tend to do low damage. Are really bad against armor too. So these weapons struggle with damage, but they have incredible AoE. This is the biggest AoE in the game. And so you hit so many targets that that you tend to do, you have higher chances of injuring something because you do low hit point damage, and the crippling strike saves you to do an injury even if you do low damage to hit points. And then the executioner buffs up your whole damage, buffs up your armor damage and your damage against hit points. So this is also something I tend to like with guns. Like the AoE, everybody is either injured, and with the second shot, especially if you go for a double gunner build, you just swap to the second gun and then you just get bonus damage from your executioner. Like that a lot. Really strong again on a hybrid that has Nimble and therefore more flex perk that I can put into damage. And these Nimble builds, the Nimble Archer, the Nimble Thrower Duelist, and the Nimble Crossbow, Polearm, or Gunner tends to be the strongest builds, where Crippling Strikes Executioner really shines. And yeah, these are my findings. I think it's really strong on AoE builds like the Great Sword or the War Size, the pole hand, polearm. It tends to be not that strong on the AoE hammer, but I think Executioner is okay here. I just think that Crippling Strikes is not that strong on this build. And yeah, on other big two-handed weapons, it tend to not do that much. You could argue that because you only hit once, but you can only hit once per turn, and you do so much single target damage that you're always injuring something most of the time. So your Crippling Strikes doesn't do much. Executioner can just help with making 3 shots or 2 shots. And you would think now, if you have a duelist, you hit twice, so your first hit injures something with Crippling Strike, so you can benefit from Executioner on your second hit. And then you can Berserk and get Killing Frenzy and hit a third time. The problem with that is most duelist builds don't have the perks for that. Especially the Battleforged duelists, like the normal mace duelist and stuff. Or maybe hammer duelist. All of these builds tend to not have the perks to go for Crippling Strikes and Executioner. Same with the Cleaver. All these 4 action points weapons, they tend to not have enough perks to go for Crippling Strikes Executioner. But with Crippling Strikes Executioner, they would do more damage, but you would have to sacrifice for a lot of defensive things. So this might be, you can go a tempo duelist for the early game, maybe with Crippling Strikes Executioner, and just go Nimble with no Colossus, no Underdog, no Steel Bro, nothing, no dodge, and just go all out damage, all out fatigue, and just go crazy with it. Note these, if you spend 2 perks in offensive, you are lacking these 2 perks in your defense, so these pros tend to not survive that long, and in harder late game fights, they tend to die pretty quickly. So keep that in mind. I think as a tempo build early mid game, seems to be stronger, especially on AoE swords and AoE sword lances, on archers, throwers, and crossbow hybrids. Crossbow polearm, gunners, all of these ranged dudes highly benefit from Crippling Strikes, Executioners, and the AoE builds. Yeah. these are my core findings after doing more or less 2 runs with that and finding the limitations of that. And yeah, I don't think it's an all-in or nothing perk. Having Executioner on most bros just to do additional damage once in a while is kind of like Headhunter. It's not bad, but does not change the bro. But especially on range bros, having Crippling Strikes Executioner with Headhunter really changed the damage output and the consistency of the kills. And as you guys can see, my archers are just... This guy is a beast. My thrower is an absolute killer. And even this guy is decent. Although he doesn't have too many kills, he is a little bit more single target, I think. A little bit more anti-chosen specialist. And this guy does surprisingly well for somebody who has a shield. So this is something pretty interesting. Anti-armor, debuffing opponent that can kind of tank multiple enemies if you lean a little bit more into defense on this bro. Yeah, but these are my core findings on Crippling Strikes Executioner. Again, the Crippling Strikes, not a lot of, but some enemies are immune, especially the whole undead group. Goblins are too weak for Crippling Strikes Executioner for that fact to matter, really, because they have so little hit points. Although the Wolf Riders have 60 hit points, so again, it kind of tends to make 3 shots into 2 shots with Crippling Strikes Executioners, especially on thrower guys. So, I mean 2 shot, 3 shot, I don't think so. Maybe with the lower throwing weapons. If you have early game, like lower tier throwing weapons, maybe some bowlers or something. Yeah, the Crippling Strikes Executioner again helps out weak weapons that don't do a lot of damage by themselves. That's kind of the key findings I have with Crippling Strikes Executioners. Again, it's a playstyle. It's probably not the best one, but just incorporating these perks into the range bros and AoE builds is something I would recommend trying out. I find them to do a shit ton of damage, and it's funny to do a lot of damage, especially against weak opponents. It's maybe not the most competitive way to play the game, but one of the funniest way to play the game. Just smash everything with a big 2-handed sword, behead a couple of opponents. It's kind of funny. Or the Swordlance, just reap them into bits. Really nice with the Crippling Strikes Executioners. Alright guys, I think this is it for today's video. And if you have questions and stuff like that, or some arguments, I'm going to see it down in the comments below. And I do live streams, so if you want to see me making these runs, you can watch my live streams. I have many more build guides and videos. They are more designed for newer players, I guess, but you can still check them out if you want to. And yeah, thank you for watching, guys, and have a nice day, guys. Bye-bye.